And Audacity in 3, 2, 1.
Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Lynn, and I'm here with my co host, Marissa Roy. And in today's episode, we're doing part 2, and we're going to be busting some additional fitness myths.
Some more myths. Part dose. I'm excited. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, me too.
So, the first one, interesting. Keto. Kicking off with a hot one. So like, what's the myth around this though?
I don't know if it's necessarily a myth. You wrote it down. I don't know if you remember that, but
I
I think
don't.
maybe I don't know if it's necessarily a myth or it's just kind of this like hot topic that like
That's
keto
fair.
is the answer for fat loss.
Yeah. And keto, like, I mean, we can lump in low carb in there. And I think, yeah, I guess kind of where I think I'm coming from with that is a lot of people only know keto through the lens of weight loss marketing and the weight loss industry. And keto actually was originated to help with epilepsy and neurological disease because when you have that balance of fats to carbs to protein, your body does shift to producing ketones and using ketones, which is a different energy system, which for whatever reason helps with the either helps slow down the degeneration of your nerves in things like MS or with epilepsy. And I don't know the neurophysiology of epilepsy, but I just know that it was developed for that by literal like neuroscientists. So that was kind of the background of it. So I think it's just understanding that it was never made for weight loss in the first place. However, it gained a lot of traction, and now there's a bunch of subsets of keto that are like, modified high protein keto and like traditional keto, and like you could go down the rabbit hole of all the different kinds that there are, but essentially the gist of it is when you cut out an entire food group, which is carbs, I mean, the logic behind it is that it makes it easier to sustain a calorie deficit. And for a lot of people, carbs can be something that is difficult to have in moderation. For a lot of people, carbs are things that if you do have prediabetes, diabetes, high blood sugar, something like that, you're going to be more likely to want to do something that's low carb because you just know that association so well in your mind. And typically, very black and white rules just make it easier for people to adhere to some extent. I think when you're kind of really dialed in that mindset, it's like, oh, I don't have to think about it. It's easier. But I think what we lack is that part of easier doesn't necessarily mean that it's easier overall in terms of sustainability and like actually keeping that weight off. So the area where I get concerned when somebody wants to go that route is, but is that the way you're going to live forever? And if the answer is yes, then like awesome, good, great. But I just don't know many people where that's truly the case. Like there have been like a very small handful that I've come across in my life that truly feel that they could live that way, like forever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. And I think it's interesting where you have something like keto and then you have all these like subsets, right? You have modified keto, you have like high protein keto, you have this keto, you have that. Because like traditional keto is like 70 to 75% fat from total calories. And then, yeah, which is a lot. Moderate protein, 20 to 25%. And then carbs are like 5 to 10. So very, very, very low. And that is very hard to sustain
Yeah.
because you're not eating a whole heck of a lot. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, it's like you go into the net carbs thing where you're counting net carbs. And I mean, now there's like all of Quest Nutrition is keto friendly, but at the same time, I think traditional keto is much more like you're really not having that many vegetables still, right? And so I think what people who market keto as a weight loss solution try to do is, trying to kind of make it healthier by having more fibrous vegetables, having more things that increase the amount of variety of types of food that you're going to be eating so that it's more palatable and you can eat more of it and you can have these fun snacks and things that are keto friendly. And I think that that's great and all, but at the same time, like if you're like adhering to like the day one, like this was made for epilepsy, like you're probably just going to be eating a lot of fatty meats and maybe not cheese, I don't know, and eggs and all the things. So it's pretty wild.
Yeah. And the other thing I was thinking about too, because like I know a lot of people will say like, oh, well, I'm so full, like I can't eat as much.
Oh
And
yeah,
that I feel like
exactly.
that's true when you're choosing higher fat, higher protein options, then yeah, absolutely. You're gonna feel more full than if you were to eat just like empty carbs. And this goes back to our part one conversation when like, and this is my thing with people who are vegetarian or vegan or that paleo or whatever. And they're like, well, I just feel so much better. I feel so much healthier. And it's like, well, yeah, because what you were eating before was a bunch of processed crap. You were eating low protein and then you switched to this diet. So it's not the diet itself, it's just the food choices that you're making. And
Yeah.
like, so that's my big thing with like, if you go from one place, if you go from eating one thing and you go to another, is it the diet or let's dissect it? Like, what are you eating and how is that different for how you were eating before? And almost can you kind of like blend those two things to make it more sustainable and realistic in the long term?
Yeah, because it's just separating the behaviors from the label. Because at the end of the day, what I think most people want, after having talked to thousands of women, is really being able to have the majority of your diet be nutrient dense, high protein, leafy greens, vegetables, fruits, starchy carbohydrates that are complex. That's the majority of our diet. And every now and again, I have something that's a little more fun and processed or things like that. That's really what we like all desire, I think. But we do get caught up in these labels of, well, I'm doing this one thing and this worked for me. When in reality, it was the fact that that category of rules that you assigned under that label, which was whether it's keto, Atkins, paleo, whatever, it doesn't matter. Whatever you assigned to that forced your behavior to change to selecting those foods that we know are going to make us feel better and more energized. And then yeah, and then we assign it as that diet worked for me versus like I changed my behaviors, I changed my food choices, and I felt better. And I think they're one and the same, but it's the labels that really I think get people angry on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, keto, if you feel like it's something that you can do in the long run, then, if you feel better and then absolutely go for it. But
Yeah.
it is
Oh,
not the,
sorry, one more thing. You were
yeah.
talking about satiety with the like fats and protein and everything. I just wanted to clarify why that is, right? So
Mhm.
macronutrient wise, protein has the highest satiety factor per gram. So if you eat like all protein, you're gonna have a hard time eating more calories if you're just eating protein because it's so satiating. Fat is number two. Carbs are last, meaning that even though carbs can have a lot of fiber, they still won't satiate us for as much or as long as a fatty food or a high protein food. And so another reason why high protein, high fat, low carb, quote unquote, works is that it's harder to get in as many calories, period, because you are just not as hungry. You don't have cravings. It's going to cut those because you're actually just so full from all the satiating macronutrients. So for anybody who maybe didn't know the satiety factors of the three macronutrients, that's why that's the case.
Yeah. And I think another thing that we probably should have touched on is like when you reduce your carb intake to 5 to 10%, like you are depleting glycogen stores, right? And like that is
Therefore,
typically what
water.
yes, so water. So you are going to appear like less inflamed, less puffy, and you're probably going to drop a lot of weight very, very quickly, which is why I think it has this appeal. And so many people like feel the effects of it right away. So it's like, oh,
Yeah.
keto worked for me. But if you are someone who has to do keto and then you stop and then you regain weight and you feel like you have to do keto again and again and again, then I would argue, I don't think it actually worked for you because you cannot maintain the weight loss. So I think that that's something important to touch on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I think we had talked about in the last part one how when you eat carbohydrates, if you have them a little bit in excess, they're actually not stored immediately as fat. They're stored as glycogen in the muscle cell, which is fuel that's stored for later for training sessions, for it's going to be used, which is awesome because it's like, cool, it's not fat. That's awesome. But it still shows up as weight on the scale. So 1 gram of glycogen or carbs as glycogen stores 3 grams of water with it. So, that's a lot of water weight that you could be dropping by just depleting yourself of all carbohydrates, pounds and pounds across your body of water weight. And that's why I think people, what I hear a lot, you probably hear this a lot too, is like, I just need something to get me started and then I'll be good. Right. I just need to get the ball rolling and then I'm good. And I think that's what it does so well. But at the same time, it's like once you keep going, it's easy to plateau from there. It's also hard to keep it going.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, all right, we'll move on to the next topic that we have. And I love this one is
Yeah.
feeling sore means I had a good workout. And again, this is one of the things where it's like logically it makes sense, right? I can feel my muscles. That means I must have really worked them. I really, tore them down and I'm going through the recovery process. And it drives me nuts because I know that all these fitness professionals know this. Yet whenever they start up a new program or new challenge, you're like, oh, I did day one of my challenge and oh my God, I'm feeling it. It's a good one. And I'm like, you know what you're doing. Like you're just using it as like a marketing tactic, but that's not necessarily the case. Like just because you have, DOMS, so delayed onset muscle soreness, doesn't necessarily mean that you had a good workout.
Yeah. So actually, this is really funny because do you watch anything from like Renaissance periodization?
No.
So they do, but you know who they are? They
No.
do like they have like a diet app and like programming and everything like that. It's like a pretty big company. So I forget what the guy's name is who is like running that, but basically like they do this series on YouTube that's like exercise scientist shits on this person's this or this person's that, or exercise scientist breaks down this or whatever. And there was an episode where the guy at RP, God, I can't remember his name, but he had Jeff Nippert on. And
Oh, okay. Yes. I've seen that clip.
where they are arguing about like getting sore.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
like
I thought that was
yeah.
so funny because it's just two really smart guys like having a really healthy debate about soreness and muscle soreness. So it's like I actually can appreciate feeling sore after a good workout. And I think the idea that you shouldn't be sore isn't necessarily true, but is it the best indicator? Right. So but basically the gist of it was like Jeff was on the side of like soreness is not a good indicator of a good workout. But then, what's his face? I can't remember his name, was like, well, like honestly, I think if you are in this situation or that situation or that situation, like you should probably be sore. Otherwise, like I would be concerned about your progress. You know what I mean? So I think the gist of it is like soreness is a good indicator that you're pushing yourself regularly in a training program. Let's say you're doing a regular training program that's scheduled week to week to week. If you get consistently less sore over time over the course of that program, that is normal and you shouldn't be concerned about that. But I think that there should still be like, especially at the beginning of a new block or a new like set of exercises or anything new that you do, you should absolutely feel soreness because it's new. And that is what soreness is a great indicator of, is novelty. And our body's adapting to that. But then and I think if you're never sore, that's not a good thing because then like are you really pushing yourself, so it's just so gray, but I loved that discussion. I was eating it up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, but I feel like I kind of, I don't know, I agree with Jeff, but then the other guy was making some good points too. But I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I lean a little bit more towards Jeff's side of things, because I feel like not everyone trains as hard as what that other guy wants you to be training as hard as, right? So
What do you
like,
mean?
um, I don't know. I feel like most people don't push themselves to the point where they're like trying to PR or they're trying to do all this stuff. And like Jeff's argument was like, well, I could go snowboarding or I could do Pilates and I've never done that before. And like, I'm going to be sore as hell the next day. And that
Oh,
doesn't
for sure.
necessarily mean I had a good workout. It just means like I haven't used maybe those muscles before. I've never done those like movement patterns. And so like I'm going to be sore. So I just think that's something almost kind of like blending the two thoughts, but just kind of knowing at the end of the day, kind of like you were saying, is just because I'm not sore as fuck the next day doesn't mean that you didn't have a good workout.
Yeah, exactly. So the gist of it is like you should absolutely track the weights that you're using, the workouts that you're doing, so that you know, okay, I progressed from last week to this week. That is progress. That is my indicator. If I am sore as a result, great. My body is clearly having trouble adapting to this stimulus. If I am consistently sore all the time doing a structured program to the point where I'm crippled, maybe there's a recovery problem. But if I am never sore, not at the beginning, not in the middle, not in the end, not when I'm pushing myself, like question mark, I think we should look at your exercise intensity because I think you should definitely like starting a new training block, feel it a little bit after the first week or 2 weeks. And then it should die out or die down from there.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking back to like how I used to train in like 2014, 2015, where we had one leg day a week and it was brutal and you were
Yeah.
so sore the next day and then you're like, "Oh, it's leg day again a week later." But when I bumped my frequency up and my volume, but well, maybe not necessarily volume, but just the frequency in which I trained and I started to do 2 to 3 leg sessions, I wasn't having that like intense
Yeah.
soreness after every single leg session. And so it kind of broke that idea that like, oh, like I can train legs more frequently. I don't have to
Yeah.
be like, you know, the all I felt like back in the day it was like all those memes, like you'd have to use like a walker to go to the bathroom and
Yeah.
like to sit down. But
Every
that was
now and
also really
again,
interesting.
every now and again, I enjoy that feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that you do.
But generally I want to be able to move. So yeah, but
Yeah. And I think we talked about this in another episode. You know, the trainers in Brazil where they like push you
yeah.
past failure. And it's like the women are like screaming, crying, and like they're basically being forced past failure with assistance. And like if you can't walk for like the next 2 to 3 weeks, it's like, was that really a good session in the long run?
Is
I
that
mean, maybe
worth
like
it?
maybe
Yeah.
in the sense of like you get to see what you're like made of and like you figure out you can push yourself a little harder or something like that. But that should not be the goal of every single session. If you are too sore to
Yeah.
hit legs for the next 2 weeks after that, then like that's not as
Yeah.
beneficial if you were just to chill a little bit.
Yeah, that's a fun one. I mean, every now and again, it's like, yeah, go ham when maybe you're training with someone you don't normally train with, you're visiting a fun new gym, you want to try some new equipment out, go crazy. Absolutely. Do it, wreck yourself, whatever. But generally, week to week, day to day, you should be able to move after your training sessions and just being sore. And really the gist behind it is don't chase soreness. Don't chase, let me do a new workout so I can get sore in a different way. And, chasing that is going to be the enemy of your progress. Like the majority of this conversation was talking about a structured training program. But what a lot of people do is they bounce from thing to thing to thing and they don't have any gauge of progressive overload. So they just gauge it on soreness. So don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. 10,000 steps a day.
Yes. So this is an interesting one. So do you know the like I'm sure you know the story behind it, right?
I don't know. I thought like Apple just like came out with it or something.
No, so actually I think it was in the 60s this like doctor in Japan created this pedometer and it was something whatever the pedometer's name it had something to do with like the 10,000 steps like meter. And so like his research suggests something along the lines of like you walk 10,000 steps it's like good for like cardiovascular health and then that translated and like came over into the US and
Oh,
we picked that up. And then it was just kind of like this magical number. I feel like it's almost like everyone has the 12,000 calories or
uh-huh. Or
1,200
1200.
calories and then like 10,000 steps. Like those are like the magical numbers that everyone knows.
Yeah, totally.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I mean, the answer to that is that it's not a magical number, and 10,000 steps a day is great, but it can also vary. It can be a little bit less, it could be a little bit more, depending on your lifestyle. But really, kind of the reference point that I always go back to is when there was one study that looked at the relationship between like step count, body weight, overall health and mortality rates, outcomes, that sort of thing. And there was a J-shaped curve when it came to that. Or no, 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 no. There was just well, I'm mixing up studies in my head. Generally, what is considered sedentary from the research is 5,000 or less steps per day. So if you are getting less than 5,000, you would be considered sedentary, and there are more negative metabolic health outcomes to not getting more than 5,000 steps per day. But when you get into the 5 to 7 range, 7 and above, like 7 and above is considered like pretty active. All of that is really positive. So like honestly, I think the threshold for just like making it an active lifestyle is much more in that 7 range than it actually is 10. And the only reason why I kind of like to harp on that is because 10 can be tough. Like if you don't, it's actually very easy for me now for the first time ever because of having a walking pad. So I'm able to walk for multiple hours at a very slow pace every day. But without that, no, like I would never, like I would always struggle to stay in that like 7 range and which is a sedentary job. So I think it's just important to keep that context in mind of like you could be trying really hard, going on walks, going outside. That's really what the numbers trying to get you to do is to move. And if you fall short of 10, it's totally fine.
Yeah. And I feel like you and I both started getting a little bit more into like neat and tracking our activity. Was it back in like 2018?
For
I think.
me, it was like 2019 or
Yeah,
2020.
28. Yeah. Maybe 2020.
Because
Because
in
I
the
know
prep
for
in
the,
2018, we talked about how like I
yep.
wish I did.
Right. Yeah. And then I think that 2020, that was my first prep where I actually started being more cognizant of my steps and like
Yeah.
tracking it as data. Um, but yeah, it's just like super interesting. And I know that some people don't like wearing them because they feel like they get obsessive with numbers, but I don't think it's like you have to hit a certain amount every single day. It's just kind of like, what do you need to do to be more active, and just having that like awareness of like, oh, if I work from home and I sit at my computer all day long, it is very easy for me to get a couple thousand steps for the day. So like I need to be proactive. I need to be going on walks. I need to have a walking pad. If I know I'll be more active if I leave my house, right? If I go to
Yeah.
Target or if I go to the gym and I'm walking in between, machines, and I'm walking around during sets. Um, that helps because if you have no idea, I think it's very easy to underestimate how much activity you actually get.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. It's actually pretty common that people underestimate their activity and their calorie intake. But really, yeah, or they overestimate their activity and underestimate calorie intake. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And
Even
that's been
even
shown.
dietitians, like,
Mhm.
so even like experts, and I'm
Yeah.
sure we probably do that a little bit too,
Oh,
but
yeah.
yeah.
100%. I'm pretty bad at it actually. So it's just the accountability aspect. But I mean, if you don't have a tracker like that, 1 mile is roughly 2,000 steps. So, do the math, figure
Yeah.
it
And I
out.
think I think they also say about 10 minutes of like leisurely walking on a treadmill or a walking pad is about 1,000 steps.
Yep. So that tracks. That tracks.
Yep. Yeah. Cool. All right. So we will move on to the myth that women need to work out differently than men, or that they need to avoid heavy weights because they're going to get bulky.
Yeah.
Hopefully, if you've listened to this podcast before, hopefully you don't have that myth, but maybe this is your first time listening. This doesn't really align. Or, it's like the analogy, like, oh, I'm scared that if I like pick up a weight, I'm like gonna accidentally like get on stage at the Olympia and like be
Turn
this
into the Hulk.
bodybuilder. Yeah, or it's like the same thing. It's like, well, I'm, afraid to drive my car because I'm, afraid I'm gonna turn into a NASCAR driver. It's like that's not That's not how that works.
Yeah. So, yeah. So in order to build that much muscle, even men need to like in order to build muscle as quickly as I think we are afraid to, even a man would have to be on steroids for that to happen. But as a female, we have, a tiny fraction of the muscle building hormones like testosterone that are anabolic as men. And unfortunately, we are going to have a very hard time building muscle. So a lot of times you see like the rep range is like go like lighter weight for 15 reps for toning and do 4 to 6 reps for bulking or strength. And like it's like it's kind of a misconstrued way of communicating how to tailor your training towards different goals, because technically higher rep ranges lend themselves more to muscle hypertrophy, which is growth of the muscle, which if you grow muscle and you lose fat, that is what being toned is. But lower rep ranges are more geared towards building strength. However, you can build muscle at any rep range, every single one. If you challenge yourself, you'll build muscle.
Yeah, and I know that Mind Pump, they've talked about this on a couple different episodes. One of the hosts, Sal, he worked at a gym at they're in their 40s. So this was like back when he was like a teenager, he worked at the gym, and they started creating like women only workout rooms. And he was like,
Mm,
the gym closed, and I went in there and I looked, and it was like just like pink and purple and like same machines and same weights, but they were smaller, they were lighter, but they were like pink and purple, but everything was the same.
yeah.
And he was like really confused. And basically, what happened is gyms were just being marketed to men. And so the people who were like, who own gyms were like, well, how do we get more women to come into our gyms? Because we're isolating half of the population and we're losing out on a lot of money. So they basically took fitness and marketed it towards women as something new and something different. And if you use light weights, then you're not going to get bulky like the guys that are lifting over there. And that's kind of how this like thing came about.
Yeah.
This like misconception that like we have to train differently than men. We have to have different sections of the gym than men. But like you were saying before, it's like it is very, 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 very difficult to put on muscle. And we've been doing this for longer, like 10 plus years. And we're still, I'm at least for me, I'm not anywhere near as muscular as I would like to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it goes the same for like women's supplements, like they're labeled pink and whatever. It's like they're just trying to upsell you. It's the same
Mhm.
shit. Just look at the ingredients list, compare it to the male equivalent. I promise you it's the same thing. Um, I mean, there's like hormonal products that are geared towards like estrogen versus testosterone. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about like pre-workout for ladies. Like it's the same shit, maybe just a little bit less caffeine because caffeine is typically dosed based on your body weight. So like we are smaller usually than men in general. So yeah, less caffeine.
Yeah. And I will say kind of like we talk about in every single episode, like there is some level of like individual like variability, right? Like there are some women who are fast gainers, like they're able to put on muscle at a quicker rate than most people. But for the majority of women, like we're not going to get bulky. We're not going to have a masculine appearance. Your voice isn't going to drop. Like you're not going to have any of these things happen to you unless you're taking like steroids.
Yeah.
But that doesn't accidentally happen.
Yeah. Well, I'll
So
even like push back a little bit on the whole like when there are women that are fast gainers because there's going to be women that listen to this that put themselves in that category and those are not the ones we're talking about.
yeah.
Like Dana Lynn Bailey is somebody who has great genetics for building muscle. And I personally believe that she is a lifetime natural, like she claims to be, which is why she, never competed past those Olympias that she was in, because it just got too competitive for her. So I mean, I think she is a great example of somebody who is very muscular and has the genetics for it. But I think a lot of women who say, I have very muscular thighs, I have very muscular arms, and I don't really know a way to say this without sounding like a dick, but I've said it before, so I'll just say it again. I think ultimately when we strength train, we don't realize how much our metabolism is ramping up as a result of it. And a lot of times our appetite can really, really increase as a result. So when we strength train without the proper guidance or awareness around nutrition, we might think that we're eating the same. We're actually eating larger portions, gaining body fat, and thinking, oh my God, I'm putting on so much muscle. When in reality, we're just gaining unnecessary body fat with maybe a little bit of muscle. And you're going to feel stronger. You're going to be able to move more weight if you have more body weight on you. So like you're going to get even stronger in the gym as a result. And maybe that just reinforces that belief because we've never been taught how to appropriately eat to build muscle and lose fat simultaneously.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's a really good thing to point out. And like the other thing too is you want to think about like where your fat distribution is,
Yeah.
because people think like, oh, if I do this then I gain weight here. Or I have a client of mine who we thought she could be wellness just based off like her off season like photos, and we had her posing and I was like, wow, she's gonna be great. And as we started to lean down, I was like, wow, no, you actually just carry a lot of your fat in this area. And it had nothing to do with like I don't know, like, her, like some people just have like leaner midsections. Some people don't. They carry more fat in their upper body. Like, so that's
Yeah.
something also to consider is like, it could just be like you said, you're just putting on fat and you just start to see it in different areas.
Yeah. I mean, even I was a culprit of this. Like I struggled to get myself to train my arms for the longest time and a lot of my upper body because I carry a much higher proportion of body fat in my back, my arms, my shoulders than everywhere else. Like waist down, like you'd think I'm like 10% body fat if I'm like really lean, but then my upper body, it's like, do you even lift, bro? Like nothing. And yeah, it's the grass is always greener, but
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting that like that it has even influenced me to be like, I don't want to train my arms because I don't want them to get any bigger, right? And it's like, no, I just need to continue leaning out.
Yeah, I remember how like we would send each other progress pictures all the time from preps. And I remember, you were like a week out or something. We're like, your arms, your shoulders finally came in.
Like literally the day before.
Yeah.
Ah,
But yeah, so just something to keep in mind that and then the other thing too is like you're saying, like when you're putting on muscle, you're also probably going to put on fat in the process. So it's not muscle or weightlifting that's making you bulky. It's just the fact that that's what
you're
happens when you,
overeating.
yeah. Um, but again, when you lean down and you do it in a way where you're preserving your muscle mass, like you're gonna have a leaner appearance. And we've talked about this before, is like most women would benefit from putting on 10 pounds of muscle than they would just losing 10 pounds
Oh
overall.
yeah,
That's
100%.
just going to give you like a way, way, way better look and overall appearance than just losing weight. And not only that, but like muscle is just so beneficial specifically for women. Like it has a lot to do with like preventing osteoporosis, just like how you function day to day with like different movements. It helps prevent like injury, and of course helps your metabolism and weight management. So it's so beneficial.
Yeah, especially as you get older, 40s, 50s, 60s, like if you're not strength training, you're going to be withering away very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And or like withering away while at the same time probably putting on body fat because your metabolism is quote unquote slowing down, which has, oh, here's a myth that it all goes downhill after 30,
Yes.
right? But really the reality of it is, so you think about what happens before 30. Before 30, you're a child. Maybe you play sports, maybe you just run around, maybe you just have the metabolism of a kid. You're in school, you're walking around with your friends, you're hanging out, you go to college, you're walking around campus all the time. And then you get into your first career, your job, but maybe you still go out with your friends all the time on the weekends and all that. When you hit 30, it's like this, it's like, you get married, you settle down, you start to have kids, and then like on top of that, you're working. And so you're basically your lifestyle changes to where there's no more room for you, or sometimes it's perceived that way. It's like I have no time for myself, taking care of others. I'm just working, I'm just trying to get by. And then it's when we talk to women in their mid to late 30s or 40s where they're like, I need to make myself a priority, right? And then it's really not that your metabolism just starts to go to shit. It's that we just stop doing the things that benefited our metabolism in the first place, like living an active lifestyle, maybe going to the gym a lot because it's something we had more time for when we were single in our 20s or our teens versus in our 30s when we're settled down, we're in a relationship, we have kids, whatever it is. Um, and then if you've never done any of those things, then there are obviously benefits to being younger, but then it's the longer you go without those things, the worse it gets, right? So it's like if you never had that foundation to begin with, you will just find that your bone density and your muscle mass will decline with age. So if you're not doing anything to prevent that, it's like we know we have clients in their 40s, 50s, probably even 60s that are in the best shape of their life, have amazing metabolisms, have great physiques because they kept control over those variables and they
Yeah. And
really
I know
worked
that
hard.
another like factor that people will say is, well, my hormones have changed like as I've gotten older. I'm going through menopause, and
That's
we're not
true.
negating that. Yeah, it's true. It absolutely is true. But lifestyle choices and those factors that you have in your life, like we were talking about, like going to the gym, being active, like the food choices that you're making, like having a balanced diet, like that is really critical in maintaining your metabolic health. But I think that the other thing too, it's like when you're in your 20s, you have a much different dieting history than you do when you're in your 30s and 40s and
Yeah.
50s.
How much
Um,
metabolic adaptation? Yeah.
right, right, right. So that's also something to consider. It's like, is it the fact that you're 30 and 40 and, oh, you can't do anything about it? This is just the way it is. Or is it because you've never been successful in the past with diets, or you have this history of chronic dieting and your metabolism is in the tank? And so it's not necessarily that you're 30, it's just the fact that like all of your lifestyle
It's how many
factors,
years? Yeah.
right, plus your dieting history is like contributed to where you are now. That doesn't mean that like, oh, you're in the hole and there's nothing you can do. There are a lot of things that you can do.
Yeah.
It might take you a little bit more time than someone who comes into one of our programs or anyone else's who are eating like 4,000 calories. And like we can do a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I feel like in a quicker time, but it's not to say that like you just blame it on your hormones and you're stuck
Yeah.
that way the rest of your life.
Well, here's the thing about menopause, right? It's like your hormones do change. Basically, your ovaries stop making those hormones. Period. Point blank. Like you have about 25% of the amount of ovarian hormones in your body at any given time than you do when you are in a I don't know, ovulating state. What's the word? When premenopause, right? So 25% of that or less, because the only thing that's making those hormones at that point after menopause is your, what is it, adrenal glands or hypothalamus is triggering that. I don't know. But anyways, you stop. And it does make it much easier for you to lose muscle mass, lose bone density, and start to wither away. So the thing about it is that it's almost like 10 times more important that you are doing these things to a greater extent when you are at that age of 50, 55, whatever. And that doesn't mean it's not worth it. It doesn't mean everything goes downhill, but it's like if this is important to you, then like you need that foundation when you're that age. And arguably, if you're in your 40s or 30s, you should start working hard on it now because it is going to get harder. And that's just the unfortunate truth of menopause. It's like you just don't have those hormones to support keeping bone density and metabolism and things.
Yep.
But if you fight against it actively and you have the habits, the lifestyle changes, the nutrition, the training, you can appear and function as somebody who doesn't have these issues. It's just a matter of the work that you really put in.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing too, I was thinking about, so one of my friends, he works at a nursing home, or not at a nursing home, but he works with like the elderly population. And he says like a lot of people come in and they're just so frail and they have no muscle on their body. So when they fall, they
Mm-hmm.
just break essentially. And then that leads to further complications because they're hospitalized, they can't get up, they can't move, they get
Yeah.
pneumonia. And so it is just so protective in so many different ways to have muscle on your body.
Yeah. 100%. So that's a good one that we came up with out
Yeah.
of the blue.
Yeah, that was a real good one.
Yeah.
I think that that's it we had, or that's all that we had on our list. Is there anything else that you thought of?
No, I'm brain blanking. But if you guys have more myths that you want us to bust, feel free to send us a message because we would be happy to.
Yeah, we didn't really give them a lot of time between our podcast coming out and the part two. So if there is something that you guys think of and you want us to cover, let us know. If we get enough, we could always do another part three.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, awesome, guys. Well, we hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You can find both of us on Instagram. You can find me at Christina Fit and Marissa's at Marissa Roy Fitness. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you back next week.